Welcome to Project Pack number 10, day 1. My name is Rick.
Hi, I'm Maria, and we thought we would start out by recreating the original legend of Zentangle that came in the kit. And so on page 5, Molly designed this, is on page, let's see what the page is.
It's spread L5. You can
Spread
see it down
L5,
the
yeah.
bottom right there.
And so what we're going to do, I'm just going to go over these, and a lot of times it's just fun to see how Zentangle started and how simple it was, and how exciting these things were. And of course, one is Crescent Moon. We always seem to start with Crescent Moon.
And part of the reason we start with Crescent Moon is that it's such a good example of aura, which is tracing the line or the shape with a little space in between.
So I'm starting out by putting down these little tiny ladybug shapes, dancing on the inside of this shape here. So it's facing the center of the shape. I'm turning the book as I go along, but I might not do it every time, so feel free to take your time and turn the book. And I get a little exuberant in my interpretations here. Always figure out that Zentangle can take you into different places when the opportunity arises.
So one of the things that we talk about is deliberate strokes. So you'll notice that a lot of them, most of all of the strokes aren't sketchy. They're just very deliberate. And here goes Maria.
I don't think we have any sketchy
right.
things. They're very deliberate, purposeful strokes, like Rick said. So this is that first aura going around these beautiful black ladybugs. Ladybugs. And it already looks really cool. Just that. If we shaded just that, that would be kind of cool. But wait, there's more.
You know, and part of the beauty of aura is that you don't need to figure out where to put the stroke. You're just echoing it or aura-ing the shape that's there. So you can really lose yourself and focus in putting the ink on the paper.
And as many times as I've done this tangle, I always seem to go back to it, and it finds its way into one of my tiles, but maybe a little different each time, which is really how Zentangle is meant to be.
Yeah. So what we're showing you are it's the structure. It's like how these patterns are assembled, but it's not that you should imitate the exact way that we draw these patterns or these tangles. And that's the whole point, as we said in the introduction, and we encourage you to listen to that if you haven't, is that this is a book about you creating your legend.
How cool is that? There you go.
I love that little last bit there.
And I always go and add a little love. You see me going back and touching little things up and evening out a line.
So this is a book from one of Maria's old journals.
More like a portfolio kind of thing.
Right.
And I had gotten this on my trip to Venice, and it's a beautiful handmade book. And this is one of the first things I did in the book. And this was done in 2001. About 3 or 4 years before Zentangle came into being.
And by the way, what you just saw was a Christmas card Maria did one year. It's a joke, so if you go back and look at it, you may figure it out.
So this is early.
It was early.
It was early Crescent Moon. So this next tangle is a really easy, fun tangle called Mist. And it's pretty much using aura, and you can see I'm adding a little bit of
the weighting there.
A little bit of weighting, but it doesn't have to. It could be just plain too.
So a lot of the the original tangles have developed their personalities. Some have changed their names. I think on the original card, this was spelled M-I-S-T, and it decided to change its name to M-S-S-T at some point in the history.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought
Yeah.
it was always like that.
No,
But I stand corrected.
no. When I looked at it, it's like, oh, it was missed. Who
Ah,
knew?
okay. I thought I knew this, but I missed it.
Yeah. You missed it?
Yeah. So this is a next one is a tangle called Xircus, and it's Xircus, and starts with a nice, beautiful X in the middle, from corner to corner of whatever your section looks like. Doesn't have to be a square section; just happens to be what we're working on.
And you'll notice that these first three so far, we're using aura, and the gap is pretty much the same. It doesn't have to be, but just as a texture, it's one of the aspects that you can adjust as you tangle.
So the auras will just keep going and keep going.
And you'll notice how Maria was rotating the book back and forth, back and forth.
And we're going to do this in all 4 sections, and it's simple and elegant. I just love how we can take these things and just have fun with them.
And you'll see even there she's doing a little bit of weighting, I'm noticing.
Well, it's my natural tendency to do that. But how cool is that?
Right? And we'll come back and shade these as we after we do all of the tiles, all the tangling.
And this is a simple tangle called Floo, F-L-O-O, and it starts out with just a curvy line with a sort of a dot at the end. And we're just going to, it's probably like the precursor to Muka, which was a little more sophisticated.
And again, you'll see the aura coming in, so that basic shape gets laid down, and then auraing that shape, and you'll see that Maria drew behind that first one.
So it's kind of Muka-esque.
Very. And I like that, the darkness of that little end on
Right.
the tendril there. It's a nice contrast.
Which is different from Muka, right?
And they just grow where they want to grow, and as you get used to it, you'll get a sense of how they want to fill the space.
I think that's the key to Zentangle. You have to kind of read your tangles and allow them to direct you.
Right. And as you do them, you develop a relationship with them, and you get to understand, their tendencies, their desires, which ones they play well with, who their friends are. It's fascinating.
Who they don't like.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Floo.
Floo.
Now we
Floo
move
has
on.
flown.
Floo has flown.
So this is my version of charts, and you can see that it's really a simple tangle. It starts with a zigzag line, as zigzag as I can make it. And again with the aura, you can see how important the whole concept of aura is in Zentangle. It's just pretty much in almost every tangle.
And you'll see it in nature as well. So it's one of our favorite analogies, whether ripples on a pond or tree rings or growth rings on shells. It's all aura. And the origin of this, I believe, was at the time I was spending a lot of time looking at financial charts, and with their zigzag lines, and this became That was the inspiration for this. And you'll notice how Maria stuffs those orbs so they're like really stacked and squished against each other.
I think I like to do it that way because it's a little more unexpected than circles that kind of sit on their own.
But again, you may decide that, I want to put in regular circles that have a little gap in them and then fill in the interstices with some color or whatever. These are the types of personal choices that everybody makes.
This is just the way I happen to tangle. No right, wrong. Everything is subject to your personality.
So it sort of has its own, each tangle has its own DNA, but like no two plants are exactly the same.
So here we go. When we originally did this tangle, we called it Scoodle, and somehow it got changed. I don't remember how that happened, and it became Printemps. But it's basically the same tangle. And, we were young and exuberant and excited about things. It probably didn't spend much time with the history of things.
Well, and also Printemps has that little inner joke about it being the season and being a spring and all of that.
Right. And again with the aura, just auraing a spiral, which is in essence a big aura, right?
And then whenever Maria gets to another one, she essentially stops, so it's that drawing behind or Hollabaugh effect, which we'll get to shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Just a nice rhythm. So except for a few tangles like the beginning of Xerxes or sometimes with bales, you don't see a lot of tangles with the lines crossing. They bump up to each other.
Right.
So I think you laid that down just to get a little chalk line to start this.
I feel like sometimes you need to know like how you would work with a string on a tangle like this. And Kiko is a really cool tangle. It's very meditative. You have to pay attention, And I usually tend to do 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a good rhythm for me, but you can do 5, you can do 3. It's all up to you.
And again, turning the tile each time, back and forth, and it's that nice 1, 2, 3, 4 turn, 1, 2, 3, 4 turn.
So this is like a basket weaving of, or any kind of weaving of sort, even fabric if you wanted to. And so now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go.
And the beautiful part of this is you'll see other people do the same tangle throughout this book. So we're not just going to do all new tangles, but we'll look at them in different ways. So you get a chance to see how other people do it. But look at that lovely texture. And the slight curve as well.
Yeah, embrace that curve and that unevenness, because if it was straight with ruler drawn lines and stuff, it's really just not that interesting. But this gives you that feeling like, wow, this was drawn by hand, this was woven by hand, or turn it upside down, do the same thing.
One of the advantages of turning it like that is your hand isn't covering the marks next to it, so you get a good frame of reference.
You just want it to be comfortable.
Yeah, so the whole point of, the whole obsession, if you will, of turning your tile is largely for your own comfort, so that you can use your comfort muscle groups for whatever stroke you're doing. There's Kiko.
Yeah, wait till you see the shading on this.
Yeah.
That's really what makes it. How fun. Look at that. Like a tapestry.
Mm. It's like those hot pads that people would make for
Yeah.
their moms,
Oh,
right?
I used to do that on that
Right.
wire thing with the stretchy.
Yeah.
Oh, those were cool. Okay, so this is another original tangle from when we first started, and it's called Floors, and it's actually our kitchen floor.
Yeah, so we're looking around, to the left, to the right, up and down, and this is what we saw in our kitchen. And we'll show it to you in a minute.
So you do a grid, like a normal, up and down grid, and then you're going to add like a diamond shape that sort of, how would you say that? It sort of caresses the intersection of the lines.
So this is one of those tangles that the lines go over each other.
Mm-hmm.
But because that part is solid, it just creates this lovely pattern.
Now this is you'll see this everywhere. You'll see it in fabrics. You'll see it in floors. You'll see it in rugs and in architecture. It's pretty common, but always people go back to it because it's so striking, like a checkerboard pattern. It's that deep, rich black on white. You can see I keep going back and adjusting the little diamond shapes.
So
there it is.
Yeah.
You can see how we were inspired by that because it's pretty much in your face, right?
So that's the kitchen stove and the floor.
The infamous floor.
Which actually, Maria, you put that down, right?
I did.
Yes.
It was when we first bought the house. I couldn't afford to hire anybody because he was going to charge me a lot of money that I didn't have, and so I decided I could do it myself, and it would have been very worth having somebody else do it. It was so much work. And this is another tangle. It's called static, and it's similar to Zircus, but we're
or
going
charts.
Charts. I'm sorry,
Right.
charts, and
how it begins.
How it began.
So again, a big static down the middle of the section, and then Aura is your friend. And find whichever way you like to hold the tile when you're doing those strokes.
And this, it has, if you take your time and really pay attention, this kind of makes your eyes go, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, it depends on how you turn it and then how you shade it. It's very fun.
You know, static. It is what it is. It would make your ears go and it makes your eyes go.
Well, and part of what we were working with on our early tangles were ones that, okay, I can do that.
Right.
Everybody would look at it and say, well, this is something that I could do. And this is a great example of Knightsbridge. Part of the reasons that we made up these names is we didn't, like this one, we could have called it checkerboard, I guess. But then you would presume that the lines would always have to be straight and they'd always have to be perpendicular. But no one knows what a Knightsbridge looks like.
Right. Okay, so Knightsbridge, as simple as it is, you need to pay attention to what you're doing, especially if you start going with some lines that aren't necessarily parallel or perpendicular, and you might lose your way. And I can't say this enough. And the way that you concentrate on this and get it to be every other one is that the black sections will kiss on the corners, and you can see that little thing. If as opposed to trying to
Skip everyone.
skip every
Right.
other one, it never works. I can't tell you often, and
It might work for you,
it.
but it doesn't work for us.
But even I did it on another thing recently, and I messed it
You
up.
jumped,
Guess
yeah.
yeah. And of course, I recovered because you in Zentangle you can. But if you're looking to have it go like this, you have to pay attention to them kissing on the corners. Simple, beautiful, elegant.
And the reason we chose that name for that one, here's a great example.
Oh, yeah. I did the newel. I painted the newel post on our front hall. Nobody else would ever have done that, right? But
To,
it's one of my favorite things.
and it matches the floor. She did the
It
floor as
reminds
well.
me of a big, like a rook, right?
Yeah.
And Hollabaugh. I'm going to let Rick talk about Hollabaugh.
Okay. So we normally teach Hollabaugh second because it has the other main principle along with aura, which is drawing behind. So see how that first board, if you will, the second board just goes behind it. And because we don't do a lot of crossing except in like some of the grid patterns, this is how we put tangled elements together in so many of our tangles. And you'll see this in nature. And much of our, the way we tangle, the patterns that we tangle are inspired by nature. See how she's drawing behind, literally lifting the pen up, figuring out where it would go, right? So if you look at branches in a tree or leaves, leaves or blades of grass, they're all drawn behind. They're not woven. And this pattern was actually inspired and shared with us by Nick Hollabaugh, Molly's husband, and he's a woodworker. And this is something he had done for many years. And
It's funny because this is one of my favorite patterns because it's totally not something I would do. And I appreciate that.
And the chaos is the
The
pattern.
chaos is the pattern. This is called poke root, again, one of our early ones. And I remember the day that we were taking a walk downtown, and on the side of the road there was this big weed growing out of the sidewalk. It was just spectacular. And the colors were bright magenta and greens
dark,
and
yeah.
beautiful. And I said, and Rick took pictures of it, and I came home and I said, I can work with this. And so he explained to me all the origins of this beautiful plant that it's medicinal, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Do you have that?
it's an herb. I'll see if I can find the picture and toss it in overlay here.
Right.
But so that's another example. And we're looking, this is how we approach tangles, is not to reproduce a botanical of poke root, but to look at the internal elements. What are the elemental strokes? What's its structure? And we call that, that's the process of how we come up with a tangle, that deconstruction.
So we get one little inspiration and then make it into a tangle as
Right.
opposed to drawing it, right? Oh, and this is called fescue, which again it starts out like the other one that I did earlier. And it's just even more simple. And it's just sort of a little grass kind of thing, like a weed that probably would invade
Sort of
your
like
garden.
alfalfa sprouts.
Yeah,
I always
yeah.
think of, right?
That's what it looks like. And it's a simple one. It's a great one for kids to do at the beginning. And anybody who's just starting, it's lively, unexpected, and not what you would think of as a pattern, but it adds this frail life to your tile that's like a newborn, right?
And you can think of these squares and shapes in this book as those little cubes that are in a watercolor set, and that you can take them and you can mix them and you can do them light or dark or a lot of water or no water or little water.
So this is called tipple, and it's actually just circles.
Mm.
And even saying the word circle, it's just roundish things, and they
Orb,
don't need to be
orbs.
orb. They can be a little off circle, but they connect together so elegantly, like soap suds.
Mm.
I put a little string on this so that I could see. We show a few different renditions of this, and I still use tipple all the time.
You can use it in background. You can use it in the spaces that are created by other tangles. And that's one of the reasons we often say to um, not make your initial shapes too small, because you might be inspired. It gives you the option of adding other shapes inside it.
So I'm doing this tipple by adding like half tipples all the way around, and then putting smaller circles inside, and that gives it another whole dimension. Again, soap sudsy.
Mm-hmm.
Next time you're doing the dishes, you just look really closely at the soap suds and how the bubbles go together. Cool.
And you get it's this idea of, okay, well, now we can do circles, and in this one we can put something inside it, and you'll see what Maria does with this. So again, this looks like the first one, but just bumping them up really, really tight together.
So if you plan to fill them, just make sure you put it, to have them large enough so that there's room to put the
Yeah.
fill.
I like how you step away from it, look at it, and then come back and add a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So that little teeny tiny circle becomes like a spectral highlight there. We actually did this on the first one.
Right.
Yeah. So again, the idea is to look at something that you normally see, but look at it with the idea of, okay, what's the pattern in this? What's the pattern in the sink? What's the pattern in the soap suds?
And the funny thing about that statement that Rick just made is that eventually you start to appreciate all the things that you took for granted. You never saw that. Who would look at bubbles? Things that you would never look at twice, manhole covers, or any, people took the time to make patterns on things and decorate them, or even like I'm trying, like moldings, or you go to a
Yeah.
museum, you're gonna end up looking at most of the frames because
Right.
the patterns on the frames are so beautiful.
So this tangle is called flux, and it's really neat for many reasons. One is that Maria and I do it very differently, but what's the origin of this, Maria?
I am a lettering artist. Some of you may know that, and my only teacher that I ever had in lettering, his name was Michael Sull, and he teaches pointed pen, and he taught me this pattern, and he called it filigree. And it was used to embellish letters. And we'll show you in a minute how that could work. But I was fascinated with this pattern, and that came quite a long time ago. I learned that. It was exciting that I was doing something other than letters with my pen, with the pointed pen. And it was so much fun.
So again, those orbs, those shapes, that basic shape, and then going back around. And this is another use of aura, is once you have that basic shape, you can set that resonance up around it, and it just frames it so beautifully.
So thanks, Mike Saul,
Yeah.
for teaching me that and so many other things.
One of the things that we hear from students a lot is they'll come back and they'll say, I see patterns. And it's not that they weren't,
No, so this is some of my letters an alphabet. I can't remember. I think I did it for a company that designs boxes or something.
Oh, and here's
Here's some
another.
more. And this is another page in my book, 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Right.
Yeah. You can see the
So many
some
different things. You can see
so
Knightsbridge and
Knightsbridge
Crescent
and
Moon.
Crescent Moon. I see Printemps in there.
So this is our front doorknob, and I like it because it's the flux. That pattern at the top is more like how I do flux. But when I saw it, I thought, this is like really cool because I've never seen an entryway with two locks in it. And I thought that was romantic. It's like, isn't that cool?
Oh, you're a hopeless romantic.
Hopeless.
It's awesome. I love it. I love it. Okay, and this pattern is called Shattuck, and it was named for Molly, and it's her middle name. And it's a pattern that I saw. I think it was on a Japanese kimono.
Like some fabric pattern.
It's
Yeah.
a fabric pattern.
And
Simple and elegant.
yeah, and the use of auric in those they're like separators, so that you can really appreciate the pattern by just making a little gap between the two strands of the pattern.
So your first lines down are sort of at a diagonal. Of course, my diagonals are a little curvy, but everything I do is a little curvy. But you could do it straight too if you wanted to just have a different look. So I go back and forth with this curve line, and then you work up to meet the space. It's an interesting concept of how it's done.
And this is a really nice one to shade because you've got that sense of over and under. You've got the sense of the two strands or the multiple strands next to each other. Again, you can see how the idea of hollowbar drawing behind and aura plays through so many of these tangles.
This is Xander. I don't remember what inspired this particular tangle, but it almost looks like a cable that's cinched
Right, with tie wraps or something.
Tie wraps or something. It looks like wire until it doesn't, or it could be like grass that you put together and tie, right? Or like when you do lavender, right? And those.
We have 5 elemental strokes, and that's the dot, the line, the curve, the S shape, and the orb. And so this one is basically
Just lines.
curves and then straight lines. So you put down those pairs of little parentheses shapes and then draw these lines in a hollowbar fashion.
You can see I'm kind of making my lines a little bit almost like wiggly, adding tiny little weights here and there, and it just gives it a more natural look, like more like a grass. And now I'm adding some highlights.
This is something we call sparkle, or adding sparkle, those little gaps.
Right.
Gives a highlight.
You see this technique in like engravings or etchings, where when they're digging into the metal, where they want highlights, like on a face or something, they would use this technique.
And you can see how you can have those sort of like blouse out and make it look like, okay, those are really compressing the fibers or whatever they are. Let's just add another one. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. So this is a very dynamic and multifaceted tangle, because it can go in so many different directions.
This is called bales.
Bales.
And I can't remember why
Why
we
it's called
called it
bales?
that, but this is a classic illumination pattern. You see it behind illuminated letters in manuscripts, old manuscripts, and it's a simple pattern but very effective.
See it a lot of Renaissance woodcuts and paintings.
So you put down your grid, and then you proceed to draw like this rice shape. I don't know how else to describe it. That covers each little length of line, and it's a wonderful pattern to do. You can get lost in it, and it's almost impossible to make an error or anything like that. It's simple and beautiful. And this is basic bales, but there's so many things you can do with bales, which we'll show you.
So now that you have this basic structure, you can now add different things inside it. And in this case, it'll be just a straight line and eventually a dot. But see how Maria has that lovely character to so many of the strokes. Part of it is the lightness with which she holds her pen, and which is another good reminder to everybody to remember to relax and take a breath.
So that's one of the fill for bales, but you'll see, everybody does it a little differently. You'll notice it even in this book.
Mm-hmm.
We might do other versions of it.
So this is called perk, and I think this is sort of a lot of the ones that Maria worked on and developed look like sea creatures or shells or these living organisms. It's very, very amazing.
So I did those first few strokes with my light hand, meaning I'm not pressing down very, very much on those shapes. And then I'm going in with my heavy hand and putting in these pearl-like, almost look like, what do you call those regular freshwater pearls?
Yeah, it's like, or peas that are like bumping up against each other in a pod.
Right. So you can see it's like a texture of a shell. You could have it I have it in that shape, but it could be a round piece or a squarish, but it's very effective.
So for this last one, we're doing flukes.
And flukes is a fragment in reticula. Before we had fragment in reticula, and it was one of the original ones, and it's fairly simple. And
one of the neat things about flukes is that depending on how you do it or how you shade it, it comes across with different. It looks different.
Right.
And so many of our tangles share similar inspiration, and there aren't, on many of them, there aren't like real sharp edges between, okay, this is this tangle and this is that tangle. And even the idea of like official tangles or anything like that, our main objective is to inspire you to put pen to paper in this sort of method. And particularly with this book is to say, okay, well, what's my style? What are my tangles? What is my legend? It's like the guide on a map that you can refer back to, and then take these as like seed ideas and then plant them in your soil and see how they grow. And they're not going to look anything like us any more than you look like us.
So I'm in this particular one. I'm not turning my tile because I think you would get dizzy watching me. So, but I encourage you to turn your tile when you're doing these.
Right. Right, particularly up against the edge.
Right.
Whatever's comfortable.
Right.
So we did all 20.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so cap your pen.
Cap your pen. And now we're going to kind of go through these with some basic shading techniques. I think the most basic way to do any shading, like even in the beginning when you're working on your tiles, is to tangle around the perimeter
To shade around.
to shade around it. That would give it sort of a pillowing effect. So you put your graphite, and on this particular thing, I don't put the graphite on the black so much as on the white, because the black doesn't need to get blacker. And you can see that, look, it just jumps
Just
off the
rising
page,
right up.
right?
Yeah.
It happens so fast that it's like, wow, it's a magic technique.
Mm-hmm. Then she's playing in here with some of the way it ripples.
The curves, yeah. It doesn't take much. This particular one is just a simple.
But when you go back with the tortillon, it just smooths it all. It's
Right, you can
great
see
effect.
it's wiggled out. Yeah, that's kind of cool, right?
Mm-hmm. So each tangle, once you do the same tangle, like she could have done the perimeter on this, she could have just done the center, she could have done the X's, and each one of those would have had a different impact.
So this way, this one I did a little bit different than I usually do it, and I just want you to see all different kinds of ways to add shades of gray. Sometimes it's not a shadow; it's shades of gray. And what I did is I treated the square like a pattern and went in each square and did the left hand triangle. So you can figure that one out on yourself too.
And in any tangle which has over and under, like this one, by shading or adding graphite to the part that's next to what's over it, it really enhances that, oh, this is going over and that's going under. So here on floors, we'll give some shading.
That's not floors.
Oh, right, charts.
Charts.
And then it lifts that center part up. A little crazy highway.
Mm.
No passing there.
Watch this just kind of jump off the page.
Mm.
Doesn't take much.
And that's a really good point. So just it's not always necessary to do every single one. Just a couple here and there gives that.
Wow,
right?
It really is effective, right?
Even more so if you had done every single one.
Right. So what I'm doing is I'm putting graphite on the top of every line. So if you you can see, well, to the left top if you
right.
turned it, right? Already you can see that it makes it so much more complicated looking in such a short effort.
Well, and it takes advantage of the curves of the lines as well. And again, with floors, there's so many ways to shade it. You could shade the individual elements. You could shade the perimeter. You could shade, as Maria's doing here.
So what this does is it takes away the grid and makes it into more like a stripe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of fun. It's like
a
it
banding.
really is a magic wand.
Yeah. So it totally changes the character.
Mm. And on this static, there's different ways that you can do this, and we'll show you in some other videos.
which is another good reminder as you're tangling, you're not done yet. Your tile isn't done, and you can always come back with the graphite and the tortillon and emphasize and de-emphasize and just sculpt it with the shading.
Knightsbridge is so dynamic that it doesn't need much, but I do like to do the edges and kind of pillow it out so you appreciate the white in the middle.
It's beautiful.
Again, it's almost like I'm sure you can put your hand out and feel the pillowing out.
Mm-hmm.
So in Hollabaugh, I'm doing each so-called board. I say board because it was probably how it was designed, and I'm just
Starting with the top one often.
Right, starting with the first one we ever did on the page, and then proceeding and just adding some like a shadow to the right of each board. On this poke root, I'm going to do something a little different than I usually do. I'm going to just do the background and pop it out, and that's also a really cool technique to get them to come to the foreground. Okay, so you can see I'm dulling down my pencil because I don't want it to be pointy, and I'm adding a little kind of a smiley face to the edge, the same edge on each one of these berries.
That's a great technique.
Right, and then with the tortillon, you'll smooth it out, and but you want to make sure that you hang on to leave some white space on there.
Right, because if everything's gray, you lose the contrast.
Right.
Yeah.
See how easy that is?
Great effect.
Isn't that nice? On the fescue, I think I'm just going to give it a little dimension at the bottom, if you can see it. Again, with the little smiley faces, you can't help, on these bubbles, right? You sort of want to have that same effect.
So you got bubbles, you got frog's eggs, and
grapes,
soapsuds. Right, so you can combine doing the individual elements and then the perimeter as well.
So on this particular thing, where I'm just going to darken the inside and make that recess like it's going, you have to look in to find that.
Nice. And again, there's lots of ways to do flux, but this really gives it that sculpted look. So what she's doing is another great technique where lines come together in that sort of crevice. You can use those as a invitation to shade one side or the other.
On Shattuck, there's a lot of different ways to do this effectively, and I'm going to do a simple way here for you. So what's happening is these vertical lines are going to start jumping out.
And she's putting a lot of graphite down there.
Right.
And you'll notice holding both the pen and the tortillon at a low angle, particularly the tortillon, it'll last a lot longer.
So simple, but it's effective. And don't hesitate to go back in. If you want it a little darker, you look at it and say, oh, I need more contrast. And on the Xander, again, I'm going to go below those rings and just give that a little bit of a whisk there.
And then sort of the opposite side-ish of where the highlight was to put in some more graphite. So you can really see those sparkles, the impact of those now.
On this Bales piece, I'm shading to the right of the rice shapes and just going in and softening that up. It doesn't need much. It's a very busy tangle.
So you find an element or a series of elements in the pattern and then work with those throughout the pattern, and that as you shade it, and it becomes just whatever consistency you do, the consistency itself becomes an element of the pattern. And we don't so much look at light source or light type as like, okay, we want to sculpt this.
Right. We call them shades of gray because if we say shading too much, somebody's going to jump in and say, where's the light source? But because it's a pattern, that's a whole different thing. You shade it as a pattern. So I'm adding graphite between the black squares. And this is just one of the ways to shade this because there's a few different really good ways.
Yeah, we have this two great examples. I think it's in our first book of Zentangle. Again, this was an early fragment of reticula.
Before we talked about it that way.
So now we're going to I'm going to grab the book that I did, and we're just going to look at that together, and just because we want you to see the differences from one to another, so that you don't think that there's just one way to do
from one artist to another.
From one artist to another, and from you, how you're going to create your legend. So let's take a look at that. So I just wanted to compare, this is Maria's that we just finished, or that she just finished, and then this is one that I did of the same spread. And, a lot of them are, some of them are very similar, like the fescue. But for instance, in this one with the static, you can see the difference in the different ways that it's shaded and the two different ways that you can do aura-ing. So as you go around a sharp corner, you can further round it, or you can maintain the same sharp edge. So those are just a couple of the different changes. A lot of things are pretty similar. One of the biggest differences are the ways that Maria and I do flux. So this is Maria's flux, the way that she learned in manuscripts, and then mine looks same principle, but totally different look. You can add different backgrounds in the hollowbar. Anything else you noticed, babe?
Just different pieces, like going around that one you did the same pretty much, and the fescue the same. On this one here, you did the pillow effect, where I did the individual squares, I guess you would say.
Here I
Yeah.
sort of played around, tried to add some shadow outside the box.
Yeah, you did that over here too,
Yeah.
around the Knightsbridge.
Yeah, and actually the Knightsbridge was so sparkly, I didn't even want to shade it, so I just shaded the outside to make it, to enhance that. And then here on the Shattuck, you can see I shaded a little bit on the individual elements.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an idea, and it's not so much about shading, except, or the point of showing this is showing that this is about you developing your style and your legend, and we look forward to spending a few days with you. So thanks for spending time with us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye now.
Bye.